Hello everyone, this is Rig. Welcome to another episode of the Mauryan Empire, and today we are going to discuss about Ashoka's Dhamma. Dhamma is the term which is used to indicate the moral and ethical disciplines which were followed by Emperor Ashok in order to run his empire. So we will go deep into the moral and ethical disciplines of Emperor Ashok. So, without doing any delay, let's get into details. Introduction to Ashoka's Dhamma. Ashok's inscriptions predominantly about Dhamma, which is Prakrit for Dharma. So, Dharma, is not the religion, it is the principles of righteousness. Dharma in Prakrit is pronounced as Dhamma. Hence, Ashokan inscriptions are the main sources from where we come to know about Dhamma. Dhamma Lipi began 12 years after Ashoka's coronation. So, after Ashoka became emperor of the Mauryan period, after 12 years of his coronation, we come to know about Ashoka's Dhamma. It extended until the end of his long reign. So Ashok was emperor for about 40 years, and until the very end of his reign, he followed the principles of Dhamma. He was very much obsessed with Dhamma, and that is indicated in his deep interest in spreading and explaining Dhamma. So he spent most of his life in spreading and explaining the principles of righteousness, that is, Dhamma. All the sources of Dhamma are derived from Ashok's personal belief in Buddha's teachings. So he was a very much supporter of the religion of Buddhism. Hence, from his personal philosophies and his support towards Buddhism, he derived the principle of. So, what were the core concepts of Dhamma? The core concept was ahimsa, which means there will be no violence towards fellow human beings or animals. This was the central theme in Ashoka's Dhamma and has been frequently mentioned in edicts. Now, what were the prohibitions stated? Prohibitions were ban on animal sacrifices and certain festive gatherings. So, there was bans on animal sacrifices completely, and certain festive gatherings were also prohibited across Mauryan Empire. And all these actions were taken 26 years after coronation. So Dhamma was a gradual process in the Mauryan period. Every factors of it were not implemented in a single time. After about 13 years of his coronation, he adopted the principles of Dharma. However, they were executed properly after 26 years. Impracticality of enforcements. It was very difficult to enforce Dharma uniformly across the vast Mauryan Empire because Indian subcontinent is a land filled with diversity in culture. Comparative rituals. Rock Edict 9 criticizes certain ceremonies and rituals as uncertain, promoting Dhamma ceremonies instead. So, certain ceremonies, especially the ceremonies which promotes animal sacrifices, were criticized in Rock Edict 9, and a few ceremonies of Dhamma policies were advocated to replace it. Dhamma's scope and Ashok's governance. Dhamma's implementation. It included medical provisions and wells. So there were hospitals to be established across his empire, not only for human beings but also for animals, and wells were to be made across uniformly across the Mauryan state because the citizens or animals should not have any scarcity of water. Ashok's practical rule integrated Dhamma as a moral and ethical guideline. So, this was the guideline through which his state was supposed to function. Activities also noted in territories of neighboring rulers like Antiochus in the northwest and Cholas and Pandyas in the south. So, different other neighboring rulers like like Antiochus and Cholas, Pandyas in the south, also included the principles of Dhamma in their own governance. Characterization of as Dhamma proclaimer. Ashok is portrayed as the ultimate teacher of Dhamma because he propagated the essence or the disciplines across not only his own empire but also of the neighboring states. He was the maintainer of Dhamma, focusing on righteousness and ethical governance. So Ashok was the central figure of implementing these. Now, how was Dhamma different to traditional Vedic practices? Varna and Ashrama Dharma contrast the Ashok's more inclusive and universal approach to Dhamma. So, Varna system was a system which was very much rigid and reserved only for specific castes during the later Vedic period. However, Ashok's Dhamma was very much inclusive and universal in approach. Unlike previous kings, Ashoka emphasized direct and personal connection to Dhamma. So his connection towards Dhamma was very much direct and personal. He himself followed it in his personal life. Dharma Vijay, Buddhist concept emphasizing conquest through righteousness and morality. So, after the war of Kalinga, Ashok advocated for peace and non-violence. Hence, the Buddhist concept of conquering the world through righteousness and morality was very much focused, as it was the policy of Dhamma Vijay. Includes Greek and Aramaic inscriptions and symbols, a symbolic use of elephants. So Dhamma is represented with the symbolic use of elephants, and Greek and Aramaic inscriptions also have references of Dhamma in it. Noted by B.N. Mukherjee and others, focusing on ethical and moral aspects in Ashok's government. Dhamma tours and propagation. Not only did he advocate Dhamma in his own territory, he sent ambassadors to different parts of the world to spread his teachings. Dhamma mahamattas, special officials appointed 13 years after coronation to spread Dhamma. So these were administrative officials whose sole duty was to see that everything was going right or righteously in his empire, and they were appointed 13 years after Ashok's coronation. Included visiting towns and promoting welfare projects. So these officials went to different towns across the empire and promoted projects related to the welfare of his subjects. Engaged various societal segments including Yonas, Kambojas and others. So these were the societal segments included while propagating Dhamma. The communication methods which were used are spoken tours and inscriptions. So, inscriptions were the medium through which Ashok spread the principles of Dhamma. Ashok found joy in these tours, enhancing his connection to people. So, it was a very much personal satisfaction for Emperor Ashok, since he found joy in connecting personally with his citizens. Now, Ashok's religious tolerance and Dhamma. How was his religious tolerance? Rock Edict 2 details Dhamma as minimal sin, many virtuous deeds, compassion, and purity. So, these are the main pillars on which the principle of Dhamma rested, that is, minimal sin, many virtuous deeds, compassion, and purity. It emphasized on generosity across all classes, including friends, relatives, and shramanas. So you are to be generous to all the classes, including your friends, relatives, and the saints also. Thus was the inclusivity principle in Dhamma. No promotion of a particular sect emphasizes mutual respect and religious tolerance. So even though Buddhism was the main religion at the time of Ashok, but there was no promotion of a particular sect of any religion, and that emphasizes that that all sects and cultures or religion were treated as equal during Ashok's reign. Rock Edict 12 advocates the understanding and respecting the Dhamma of others. So, in Rock Edict 12, we get an understanding that the emperor or the citizens are to respect all the religions across the empire. Thapar views Ashok's approach as a move beyond narrow sectarian beliefs, fostering a universal ethical practice. So, his Dhamma can be considered to be an universal ethical practice not reserved to any particular. Ethical and civic contributions. What were the contributions of Dhamma in the civil life of its citizens? Medical infrastructure improvement, provisions for medical treatment, planting of herbs, and well digging. So, these were the main infrastructure improvements done as an ethical and civic contribution of Dhamma. Many medical hospitals were built, medicinal herbs were planted from which medicines were made, and wells were digged across empire so that citizens do not have any scarcity of water. Rock Edict 7 highlights animal welfare and administrative duties extended to neighboring kingdoms. So animal welfare was very much focused upon. Dhamma was not only a practice followed by human beings, but it was to be a practice which included welfare of animals also, and those duties extended to neighboring kingdom. Hence we come to know about the influence and power of Dhamma. Broader influence actions reflected in regions under Greek and Egyptian rulers like Antiochus II and Ptolemy too. So these were the Greek and Egyptian rulers who were influenced with the policy of Dhamma, and they followed it in their own state as well. Merges the role of a ruler with ethical and moral stewardship. So, ruler is not only to rule upon his people, but his duty was also in the field of ethical and moral guidance. Thapar and Singh note that Ashok's initiative governance integrating Dhamma with statecraft. So Ashok was a man who integrated principles of ruling with Dhamma, and that was ruling with Dhamma and statecraft. Theoretical underpinnings. What were the theoretical outlines of Dhamma? Buddhist foundations. Though not explicitly Buddhist, Dhamma aligns with key Buddhist principles like ahimsa and compassion. It cannot be said that all the principles of Dhamma were taken from Buddhism, but it aligns itself with key Buddhist principles like ahimsa and compassion. It differs from traditional Varnasrama Dharma, promoting a more inclusive societal role. So, Dhamma reserved according to different caste was not the principle of Ashok. It included all the sects and cultures within the society. Thus, Ashok's Dhamma was more inclusive in nature. Power and piety title reflects the dual role of Ashok as a ruler and a spiritual leader. So Ashok was not only a ruler but also a spiritual ruler, a spiritual leader in the Mauryan kingdom. Arthashastra and Digha Nikaya used to compare and contrast Ashok's principles. So there are texts from the Mauryan period like Arthashastra and Digha Nikaya who do not align themselves with the principles of Dhamma. It aimed to replace the traditional conquest with missionary spread of ethical and moral values. So, all the traditional policies of conquest through war and military campaigns were to be replaced with conquest of one's kingdom through righteousness and moral values. Dhamma as a propagation tool. Rock edicts were strategically placed and read during auspicious days to maximize the impact. So there were rock edicts among the different states of his empire, and they were strategically placed in such a way that they can be read during auspicious days to maximize the impact of Dhamma. Utilized oral communication through Dhamma Mahamattas. So, Dhamma Mahamattas were the officials who used to go from place to place and talk about Dhamma principles and how it will help in spiritual guidance of the state. Dhamma tours conducted tours during Trishya constellation and other significant times for direct engagement. So, astronomical features were taken into account, and on astronomically special days, Dharma tours were conducted throughout the empire in order to maximize the impact of engagement of Dhamma with the citizens of his empire. It targeted all societal segments, including traders, servants, and royal family. So, this was a principle not reserved for any specific class, caste, or creed. It included all segments of the society. Thapar discusses Ashok's use of Dhamma as a unifying strategy despite its practical challenges. So, it was considered to be an unifying strategy across the empire. Dhamma's impact. Ashok's effort led to significant changes in the moral and ethical landscape of his empire. So, there was a very significant change in the moral and ethical landscape, considering the fact that after Kalinga War, as stated in Rock Edict 13, and shift towards non-violence. So, after Kalinga War, Ashok turned his attention towards peace and non-violence, and that can be considered to be a cultural and ethical shift in the policies of a state. Rock Edict 12 promotes a deep understanding and reflect for diverse Dhamma. So, in the Rock Edict 12, the policy of Dhamma has been explained in detail, and it promotes a deep understanding towards the moral and ethical principles. It went beyond the immediate kingdom to regions under foreign rulers. So Dhamma was not only reserved for Mauryan kingdom only, but it spread as far as the Greek rulers like Antiochus II and Ptolemy II of Egypt also. Ashok's personal transformation from a conqueror to a propagator of peace and Dhamma. So, Ashok was considered to be a very imperialistic ruler before the Kaling War, and after the Kaling War, when he adopted the principle of Dhamma, he was transformed from being a conqueror to a propagator of peace. Diplomacy and international relations. What were the diplomatic factors within this principle, and how did it influence international relations? It engaged with rulers such as Antiochus, Ptolemy II, and others through Dhamma driven policies. So, these were the neighboring rulers of Greek and Egyptian states, which also adopted the principle of Dhamma. Hence, we come to know about its influence. It aimed to spread ethical governance beyond empire's borders. Singh and Thapar discussed the spread of Dhamma in diplomatic context. So, this was a tool of diplomacy also, because through the influence of Dhamma, Ashok could spread his ideas worldwide. Ashok viewed Ashok is viewed as a king who pioneered international and moral ethical standards. So even though he was the ruler of the Mauryan Empire, he can be considered as an agent of globalization because he pioneered international moral and ethical standards. Used Dhamma as a tool for fostering cross cultural respect and understanding. So, Dhamma was used as a tool to promote cross cultural respect and understanding. Ashok's personal commitment to Dhamma. What was his personal commitment that influenced the Dhamma across the state? After the Kaling War, Ashok embraced Dhamma, profoundly influencing his governance. So, after the Kaling War, his sole obsession was with embracing of the moral and ethical principles to propagate peace. Rock Edict 13 details his remorse and shift towards non-violence propagation of Dhamma. In Rock Edict 13, we get a detailed explanation of how the mentality of Emperor Ashok changed from being a conqueror to a peace loving ruler after the Kaling War. He hoped that future rulers would also continue his ethical approach. In all his edicts, he has promoted the Dhamma not only for the present time but also for the future rulers. He emphasized on lasting peace and ethical governance as his administrative landmark. So, his administrative landmark, as emphasized by him, was on lasting peace and promoting righteousness, highlighted by Thapar as unique blend of personal belief and royal duty. Architectural and symbolic representations. What were the architectural and symbolic representations that promoted the principles of Dhamma? The Ashokan pillars symbolize Dharma's enduring presence. So, through the Ashokan pillars, he propagated the principles of Dhamma across his empire, and thus the pillars stand as a symbolic gesture towards enduring presence of Dhamma. Feature Buddhist motifs and ethical messages like at Sanchi and Girnar. So in Sanchi and Girnar, we get inscriptions that feature Buddhist motifs and also ethical messages. Elephant carvings signify Buddha's conception and Ashok's personal faith. So the representative figure which symbolizes Dhamma is the elephant carving, and that signifies Buddha's conception also, along with Ashok's personal faith. Greek and Aramaic inscriptions show the multicultural aspect of Ashok's rule. So Ashok's rule did not only influence Indian culture but also the influence spread outside the Indian subcontinent. Ghosh and Mukherjee note the artistic and spiritual dimensions of Ashok's pillars. Critics and historical interpretations. What were the critical aspects of Dharma and how was it historically interpreted? Historical debate, varied interpretations of Ashok's Dhamma as a political tool for a genuine ethical reform. So, Dhamma has been interpreted by many historians in different contexts, and there is a debate regarding whether Dhamma was actually a genuine ethical reform or it was used as a political tool to spread Ashok's influence. Thapar suggests it might not have been a unifying strategy as intended. So, even though Ashok intended to unify the whole of India and beyond through the principles of Dhamma, but it might not have gone exactly according to plan. It is linked to Buddhist principles but also unique in its broad application. Even though Dhamma is very much linked with the principles of Buddhism, but still it was very much unique because it did not only include the principles of Buddhism like Ahimsa but also included the personal beliefs and faith of Emperor Ashok. Differences and similarities with other religious and ethical systems of the time. So there was quite different approach in dharma, considering that the later Vedic culture was not that much inclusive in nature as compared to the principles of Ashok. Legacy and assessment, evaluating the long term impact on later Indian and regional governance models. So, Ashok served as a landmark or a representative feature of moral and ethical principles for the later rulers who were very much influenced by him. Dhamma as a state policy. How was it important as a policy of state? Formally, Dhamma was adopted and integrated into state policy 13 years after Ashok's consecration. So, after Ashok became king, it took 13 years to adopt the principles of Dhamma into his state policy, utilized to unify diverse populations under a common ethical framework. So, Dhamma was utilized to take or include diverse categories of populations in a common ethical framework. Involvement of Dhamma Mahamattas in propagating ethical standards. So that was the state machinery through which Dhamma Mahamattas were the officials who went on propagating the ethical standards of Dhamma. It emphasized on ethical living in both public administration and private behaviors of citizens. So this was not only reserved for public administration but also private behavior or personal culture of every person was to be governed through the principles of righteousness. Singh and Thapar emphasize the role of Dhamma in achieving administrative now, spread and influence of Dhamma. How much did it spread and what was its influence? It extended from the heartland in Magad to distant parts of the empire like Gandhara and beyond. So, it started from Patliputra, that is the capital of Mauryan Empire in Magad, and extended as far as Gandhar, which is the northwestern extent of Mauryan Empire, and spread beyond that also influence local customs and traditions, fostering a pan Indian ethical identity. So, it influenced all the local customs and tradition across the Indian subcontinent, encouraged harmony and dialogue among various religious communities. So, there were discussions regarding religions and dialogues held by the emperor himself, where different religious communities came together and discussed about their agendas. Pillar and rock edicts serve as primary sources detailing the spread and influence of Dhamma. So, pillars and edicts are the primary sources from which we get to know about Ashok's principle of morality and righteousness. Influence on successors. It aimed to set a precedent for future rulers regarding ethical governance. So Ashok served as a benchmark of which was achieved during that Mauryan Empire on the field of moral and ethical governance. Implementation challenges. There were many challenges while implementing the principles of Dhamma. There was difficulty in enforcing ethical guidelines across a vast and diverse empire. So, Mauryan Empire comprised of different states with their own individual culture. Hence, as a uniform factor of moral and ethical guideline, Dhamma was very much difficult to enforce. Some regions and communities were less receptive to the new ethical directives. Some regions did not accept Dhamma as it was intended by Emperor Ashok. Thapar and Singh discussed the practical challenges faced by Ashok in implementing Dhamma. So there were many challenges like the Dhamma sometimes contradicted the local culture of different diverse peoples. Hence, there was a difficulty in enforcing it uniformly across the Mauryan Empire. Variability in how different parts of the empire embraced Dharma. So, this principle was not accepted uniformly and it was not uh, adapted uniformly across Ashok's empire, and there was variability in its acceptance. There is debate among historians about the lasting impact and the real change brought about by Dhamma. Now, Ashok's legacy. What was the legacy of Emperor Ashok? Ashok's Dhamma left a profound impact on Indian ethical and moral thinking. And still, as an Indian, many people refer to Ashok's Dhamma as the moral and ethical standard of being an Indian. It is some provisions of Dhamma is even included in present Indian constitution. It is considered as a revolutionary move away from traditional conquest to ethical governance. So this is a change in the policy of conquest from military campaigns to ethical governance. Dhamma principle continue to influence Indian cultural and spiritual ideologies. Even today it is included in governance strategies of India. Hence it continue to influence Indian cultural heritage. It is evaluated by Thapar as a significant, albeit challenging, reform in ancient governance. It is a very significant thing in Indian history where we see a ruler shifting from military conquest of violence to propagating of righteousness and peace. Ashokan edicts and pillars remain key historical sources and tourist attraction even today in present Indian context. Now, evaluating Dhamma's historical significance. Here we will go through a summary of the entire presentation. Ashok's Dhamma represents a synthesis of ethical practices across various Indian traditions. So, this was a synthesis of ethical practices, showcases Ashok's role as a forward thinking leader who used moral and ethical reforms to govern. Extensive inscriptions provide insight into philosophical depth and administrative strategies of the empire. Continues to be studied and admired for its ambition and scope in integrating ethical practices into governance. Thapar, Singh, and Mukherjee provide comprehensive analysis of Dhamma's effectiveness and so that was all about Ashokan Dhamma and how did an emperor change from being a violent military ruler to a propagator of righteousness and peace. Hope you have liked it. In this Mauryan series, I plan to bring videos regarding all aspects of the empire. So support me so that I can bring brighter contents in future. Thank you so much for your love and support.